New Year's Eve 1989 was vitally important. Okay, not Y2K new century important, but pretty close. A new decade was on the horizon. Even though I was born in the 1970s, I was a child of the 80s. Reagan, We Are the World, Hands Across America, MTV, Republican rule. It's all I'd ever known. But things were changing now. I was changing. The 90s would see a different me, a different pop culture landscape. And 1989 had been the first step in that transformation. Hello and welcome to the Pop Culture Basement. My name is Mike Jamison, and with me today to discuss the year 1989, his first time down in the basement and his first time on a podcast, which is a trend because I think the last couple of podcasts I've had my first-time podcasters on 3 out of the last 4 times. So I love breaking these people in and getting them hooked into the podcasting world. With me for the first time down in the Pop Culture Basement today is Anthony, otherwise known as Tin Foil Consortium. Am I saying that right?
You're saying that right, yes.
Yes. Anthony, how are you today?
I am well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, it's awesome. You are somebody I met on Twitter. I almost said the other name.
We're not talking about that one.
No, I almost said it. God, ugh. I've only had half a cup of coffee. I'll chalk it up to that. But we met on Twitter and just started talking about all kinds of pop culture stuff. And when I brought this subject up, you were the first person who responded back to me. So before we get into the year 1989 and our pop culture experiences in 1989, I always ask my first-time guests, what was it like for you growing up consuming pop culture? Did you have a certain place that you would go to that was yours, basically, that was your special place to consume pop culture growing up?
We moved around a lot. So my dad worked in engineering, specifically diesel electronic engineering, and so we moved quite a bit. Mostly because, especially like when we're talking about the 80s and we're talking about changes in regulation, changes and things like that, he went from Caterpillar to another company that's defunct to AC Delco to Cummins to things along those lines. So the one thing that was always consistent with all of that was I always had a bedroom in the basement. Always. So to the point where in one house it was an unfinished basement, the next house it was a half-finished basement, but everything was right there. The TV, the entertainment center with the World Book encyclopedias and the highlights for children and all of that, but it was also that place where I could get away and not feel like what I'm watching is being critiqued.
I had a friend, he was my best friend growing up in grade school, and he had a bedroom down in his basement, and I thought that was the coolest thing because it seemed so much bigger. I shared a bedroom with my brother, so it seemed so much more grown up and so much bigger to me. And he was one of the first people I knew who had a computer. Yeah. And this was late 80s, so it wasn't even 90s with the internet, but he had a computer. And in the 80s, when you had a computer, you thought, oh, I can do anything. I could somehow hack into my school and change my report card. I can hack into the government because that was what movies and TV shows showed us.
Like, we're playing chess against a computer, and then it ends up going to near nuclear apocalypse.
I thought I was going to get to go over to his house and do that kind of fun stuff, but I never did. I was always jealous of him because it seemed like he had so much more space. He had so much more room. He had so much more. He had a sister, so he obviously didn't share a room. So he had more privacy, and it just seemed so much more grown up. I would get, this is what it's going to be like when I have an apartment.
Right.
It's a little bit different when I finally got an apartment.
Very much so. But no, I can completely relate to that. Like I have 2 sisters. And they had to share a room for many years. But being the only boy, I get my own space.
In all honesty, I my brother and I always got along, so it wasn't that bad. But we lived in a row home in Philadelphia, so I will tell this in total 100% honesty. We did have 3 rooms in our top floor, so it was my parents' room. We shared a room, then we had a back room. When I got old enough, my parents said, well, you can go into the back room. But I was such a wuss, and I didn't like sleeping by myself. I did go into that room, but then I'd usually sleep in our basement on the couch, which I still do sometimes. I did last night because
Right.
I was up until 2:00 in the morning watching TV, and I'm just lazy and old and didn't feel like getting up and going upstairs to my bedroom, so I just slept on the couch. I used to sleep on the couch down in the basement because I would stay up all night, and we were talking before we jumped on air that I just woke up my son at 12:00 in the afternoon. I say to my wife, I can't get too mad at him because I did the exact same thing when I was growing up. I would stay up till 4, 5, 6 in the morning watching movies. I would read. I'd watch TV. He stays up a lot playing video games with his friends, but it's the summer, and I used to do the same thing. My
Yeah.
dad used to work shift work, and he'd come downstairs to go to work to get his coffee and come down and look down the steps and look at me and just shake his head and then go back upstairs. And now I find myself doing the same exact thing, but I say that, you have to be the adult. So
Right.
I wanted to know, because as I stated, the subject of this episode is 1989, and it's not, I kind of facetiously said the year in pop culture. It's not really that. For me, I wanted to do this episode because as I thought about it, and as I see my 2 young kids now, one is 14, one just turned 14 this year, one just turned 11 this year. They are starting to get into their own things, their own likes and dislikes. They've moved past my wife and I saying, okay, we're going to watch a Disney movie tonight. Okay, we're going to watch this TV show. They are now in the part of their young adulthood where they say, I want to watch this TV show. They ask. My son will ask me, hey, have you ever watched Breaking Bad? Would that be a good show for me to watch? My friends watch Dexter. Can I watch that show? And even my daughter is now, this summer, we're rewatching I'm rewatching Buffy the Vampire Slayer with her. She's never seen it. I kind of suggested it to her, but I knew it was something that she would probably like. So we've hit that point where they are moving beyond those parental constraints of us dictating their likes and dislikes in what they watch and consume in pop culture.
Right.
And it made me think about when did my consciousness basically open up to what I really liked instead of what it was my parents watched and listened to, and kind of mirroring what they were consuming in pop culture. And for me, it was 1989. It was when I was 14. I turned 15 in November of 1989, but 15 years old. I started the year of 1989 as a freshman in high school and ended it as a sophomore. So 1989 was the year of basically my pop culture awakening. So I was interested in why you were so fast to respond to me when I put this out there on social media on if anybody would like to discuss 1989.
Well, because it's for me, it was very pivotal. I'm considerably younger. I think I was in '89. I was starting second grade.
Oh, rub it in.
Hey, if it makes you feel any better, I spent so many years enlisted. I'm like basically 92 internally. But no, I had like smatterings of pop culture here and there. My dad and mom did really well in making sure that I had access to things that were going to be important later. So, '89, we got our first computer. It was a computer that my dad's work was getting rid of, and he's like, "Well, I'll take it," and go figure. Now I work in IT doing all of this stuff that I started learning as a kid. In 86, 85, we got our first VCR. So by that point, I'm learning how the VCR works and how I can record my favorite shows and things along those lines, like what tapes I can use. Don't use Uncle Bob's wedding tape. you know,
It's funny,
um,
for you, it's Uncle Bob's wedding tape. For my family, my dad had a copy of Eddie Murphy. It was Eddie Murphy Delirious
yep.
that a friend of his gave him that he taped off of probably HBO, and my mom taped her soap operas on it. And my
Oh
dad was like,
my.
"Oh my God, how are we gonna get a new copy of this for him?" Because this was the late '80s, early '90s when you couldn't just go out and buy whatever videotape you wanted, or you couldn't download
Right.
you couldn't
Well,
download the special. But that goes back to what you're saying. We're of that generation where you were just getting. I can remember getting my first VCR, and that was just this podcast. It's a lot of people of the same generation, so we do. Not like old man shaking fist at cloud, but we do bemoan, or I do, that these kids today, they have everything at their fingertips. Mostly everything. I'd say 90% of everything. If they want to watch a certain TV show, you just go and find it, and boom, 5 seconds later, you're watching it.
right.
Computers and laptops and phones. I say this to my son and not in a mean way, but he'll ask me something that is something that he could find out himself, not some deep parental question that he has for me, but something mundane or something that he should be figuring out himself. And I'll say to him, you have an instrument of total knowledge in your hand that you use to play video games all day.
Right.
All you have to do is look it up. And we could never say that for us.
If only there were a device.
Yes. So yeah, it's always just interesting to hear memories of a certain age when you get your first VCR, you get your first computer, because that was a big thing. That was an important thing in our lives then, because it wasn't something that was in our lives all the time like it is now.
By 89, you could go and get a 5-pack of blank tapes for not as much as your car costs, right? So by 89, it was my mom would, with the help of a TV guide and with the help of having conversations, she would, when they were doing the free weekends, and for you kids out there, free weekends also included Disney at this point. Disney used to be a premium channel back in the 80s. It was, okay, they're doing the free weekends here, and here. Go grab a pack of tapes. And my mom would just sit there and record everything. She put it on SLP, so that way it would be 6 hours per tape. And she would hit record and walk away and do what she was doing. Between me, who was 7 years old, and my sister, who was 6, and my other sister, who was 3, it's not like she was sitting there just watching it, right? But with the VCR, you could just record whatever was happening, and you could still do the parenting and things like that. So, and those free weekends were big in our house, because
that's another timestamp you're bringing up, because for me, in the late 80s, early 90s is when we finally got cable. And that was something big for our generation too. You would have free weekends before that. But I remember that was the talk of the neighborhood. Oh, we're finally getting cable. We're finally getting cable. Because it was this big, unknown, vast landscape that we had only heard of in whispers, or maybe there was the lucky people who had HBO. Maybe they were the families with a little bit more money. You would try to become friends with those people so you could go over the house and watch a movie every once in a while.
Exactly.
But it was this whole new vista that was opening to you when, we finally have cable. We finally have a cable box on top of our television.
And we lucked out. There was the flashback with Mac Tonight in, I think it was 87 or 88. We're the ones who won that Disney trip. We won one of the Disney trips, and we won a free year of the Disney Channel.
Oh, wow.
So we had a cable box, but after that free year, my parents were going to pay for that at all. So, and they're best friends, they're still best friends with them now. My parents vacation with, I'm not going to use their last name, but Mike and Dorothy, who now live in the Green Bay area. But they're best friends. That's how, like, when we first got that box, they pretty much just delivered it to the house, and we're like, here you go, figure it out.
Yeah.
But Mike and
What
Dorothy
is
had
this
that cable for
what
years.
is this strange device? What do we
Yeah,
do?
exactly. So we had to figure out, my dad had to figure out how to connect it and then
Sure.
connect the VCR to it through the in and out, because you know it, it's not the same as having your antenna and then your bunny ears to try to improve the picture.
I find myself doing that also in if we're watching movies from, I mean, it could be the 80s, the 90s, or if you just see them out in the wild, a payphone, antennas up on roofs,
Oh
especially
yeah,
when we go into the city, because you still see them sometimes. They're probably just not, they were just never taken down. But explaining to my kids like there's some, like I'm Indiana Jones. And I'm like, oh, do you see that over there? That's what I had to use back in the day when
right,
on top of our house just to get channels in. And we only had 5 channels, and some of them you couldn't even see them clearly.
right, exactly.
So, what is it regarding 1989 that makes that year so special to you for pop culture?
I think I really kind of became aware of the world a bit more. Like I can remember watching the fall of the Berlin Wall at the end of that year. I can remember all of these things that were like impactful to my life. I mean, my seventh birthday was a Batman birthday. The movie hadn't even come out yet. Hadn't seen
True.
it. Didn't matter. It was Batman. So we're getting things like sequels to some of the biggest movies of at that point, my life. Ghostbusters 2. There were so many things that I was able to absorb and have a bit more cognition of absorbing them. I wasn't limited to Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers and
Mhm.
things like that.
Yeah, I want to get into it. You can't bring up 1989 without bringing up Batman, and I did a Batman episode a couple episodes ago with regarding the Burton and Joel Schumacher movies. So
Mhm.
I talked about Batman, but 1989, whenever that's shorthand, whenever you watch, put it on the History Channel or CNN, if they're doing a documentary about the 80s, they're going to get to 1989, and one of the first things you're going to see is kids shaving the bat symbol into the back of their heads.
Right.
That was for me, and I said this in the episode, so I'm probably going to be repeating myself with some of this stuff. It's not like now where the buildup is you get the casting of someone, and then I'll use the Superman movie as an example. You get the cast, you find out who's going to play Superman, then you're waiting, you see some behind the scenes photos of them filming, and then you get the teaser for the teaser, and then you get the teaser, and then you get the first trailer, and then you start to get a little bit more information, then you get the second trailer. It wasn't like that for
No.
us growing up. You were waiting for Entertainment Tonight to maybe they would play the trailer, or maybe they would play a couple of clips, or maybe they would have a making of or behind the scenes story that they would do. But other than that, you're reading Starlog. I would go to I'd go to the mall with my mom and my grandmother, and while they shopped, I would go into B. Dalton or Walden Books
Right.
and
Exactly.
sit there and look at Starlog magazine or look at Entertainment Weekly or Premiere magazine and try to read about the movies that were coming out. So I don't remember even going to a movie and seeing the trailer for Batman or seeing any kind of preview. I just knew it was coming out because I was deep into comic reading at that time also. So they were talking about it.
Well,
But
for me, it was we had gone to go see All Dogs Go to Heaven in the theater. Like going to the theater was, again, for you kids out there, uh, going to the theater in some form or capacity was always how you found these things out, because you would walk in, you'd get your ticket. It was a pull off tear, hand you the stub, and you would walk in, and there would be just this row of posters coming soon,
yes.
coming soon, coming soon. And that one in particular was coming soon, and all you saw was the gold and the black, and not even the full symbol. Just you were like, I think they're doing a Batman movie.
That the gold and the black and the June 23rd, I always bring that up. I
Yep.
mean that's some of the best marketing ever done by just holding back. They were so smart to hold back instead of just show everything, especially because they were so nervous about Michael Keaton and the reaction that people had to him casting. So they kind of had to, but they were smart to hold all that stuff back and just make people want it even more just to see it. Because, and this is again, and this is the danger, but it's also the fun of doing these podcasts where we're almost comparing it and saying, well, back then, but it's not like now. And I am still amazed that I live in a time where I now will say, I don't need to go see Thunderbolts because I'll just wait until it comes out on streaming because it's not really, I don't really follow those characters. Back in 1989, yes, it was Batman, so everybody knows who Batman was. But
Right.
you were hungering for any kind of you were hungering for any kind of superhero cinema. So you'll take, a couple of years later, you would take a Shadow film, a Phantom film, Dick Tracy, because, hey, this is what you're getting. So, and you might not get anything else for another 5 years. So I'll take it. Now, as I've said, and I've said this on other podcasts, I'm at the point where it's like my comic reading back then, where I'd walk in and look at the rows of comic books and say, okay, I don't really read Flash, so I'm not going to buy that, but I read Batman. Now, if I don't want to go see the Fantastic Four movie, I'm just not going to go see it because there's going to be another superhero movie 6 months or a year from now, definitely, that I know will be coming out.
I mean, and look at some of the things that we're doing now in media that really kind of, I feel like they cement our place in pop culture. We're doing a Fantastic Four film. We're doing another Superman. We're constantly doing anything in the DC and Marvel universe. And it goes as far as, they're filming a new Highlander right now. They're all of these things that were maybe not as successful as Batman, obviously. But all of these things were, which is, one, it shows the lasting impact of this time period. And two, unfortunately, it shows a lack of willing to take a risk on something like a Batman. I mean, it was a very risky thing for them to do. And especially considering that Burton was so heavily influenced by Frank Miller's Batman, that darker, that grittier, everything is black and white, and that was reflected within the art. Taking Gotham and not having it be downtown LA, not having, smiling Adam West and G. Willikers Batman, Burt Ward, but in the risks that were taken not only by the studio but by the director at that time. And that influence is felt to this day. If without Tim Burton's Batman, you don't have the animated series. Without the animated series, you don't have, the Dark Knight trilogy. Without the Dark Knight trilogy, you don't have the modern DCU. So, I mean, those types of risks, and again, you bring up Dick Tracy in The Shadow or The Phantom. The biggest problem was they wanted to make films that could capture that zeitgeist that was Batman, but didn't want to pay the licensing. So what do? You go for things that are within the public domain. And
they tried to make them, everything that followed Batman, you saw that influence. You're talking about the broader influence, which obviously Batman is ground zero for comic books.
Absolutely.
And what we got with comic book movies. But in a smaller sense, those movies tried to mimic what Batman did and just didn't do it as well.
Right.
And didn't have the talent behind it. That Tim Burton edge, that Tim Burton kind of perspective that he could just skew a little bit and move Batman to his perspective, that made it something that was so unique and something you had to experience in the theater.
Well, and again, getting someone like Michael Keaton, who I know you did a show on Batman already.
No, it's okay. I always like talking about Batman. So you can't do a 1989 episode and not talk about Batman.
And the thing is that you're getting someone like Michael Keaton, who at that point was only really known for Mr. Mom and gung ho. You know, had if that had happened today,
Oh,
and this is such a ridiculous thing to say, and I'm clearly being facetious, but it was like, all right, the role of the Punisher is going to be played by Adam Sandler.
sure. No,
It's
seriously,
the
yeah.
same perspective.
Yep.
It's all of these risks and getting everyone that was in that film to be in that film, from Billy D. Williams to Jack Palance to
Jack Nicholson.
Jack Nicholson to Michael Gough. It was the be all end all of movies for that year. And like one of the things I can remember is I saw that in a double feature at the drive-in. The other movie playing with it was Ghostbusters 2.
That's a good segue, by the way, because I was going to segue into how you spoke about 89 was very much, in movie-wise, the year of sequels. Ghostbusters 2, Lethal Weapon
The
2,
Weapon 2,
Indiana Jones and the
and The
Last
Last
Crusade.
Crusade.
But Ghostbusters 2, if Batman was the movie I was obsessed with seeing, Ghostbusters was very close.
Yes.
Ghostbusters 2 was very close. And I saw both of them. I didn't see them in a double feature, and I didn't see them in a drive-in, which would have been pretty amazing. I saw them both at the Shore Mall. We used to stay down the shore. My mom, my brother, and I, and my aunt and my 3 cousins. We would stay in a trailer down the shore in a campground, and it's not a campground like you just go out camping and you make a fire.
Right.
Everybody, when I would meet friends, they would think that, and I was like, no. My mom is an Italian girl from South Philly. She's not making a fire somewhere. This was a bigger trailer. It was in a trailer park that had a pool and a lake. You could go swim in.
It's like a KOA,
Yes.
a camping resort.
Yeah, exactly. And so we would stay down there the whole summer. My mom was a teacher, so she had off the summer. And my dad and my uncle would come on the weekends, and they would go home and work. We lived 2 doors away from my aunt and uncle in Southwest Philadelphia in row homes. So we would vacation together. We would do everything together. So my dad and my uncle would go home, and the kids and my aunt, my mom, and my grandmother and grandfather, who lived with my aunt and uncle, we would stay the whole summer. So I saw Batman and Ghostbusters 2, and I think Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade at the Shore Mall, which was a mall that was right outside of Atlantic City, New Jersey. I saw Terminator 2 there also, I remember. I feel like I saw Ghostbusters 2 by myself. That can't be. Like, I didn't drive there because I couldn't drive yet. I don't know why my parents wouldn't be there, but I do remember going to see Ghostbusters 2 there. I saw Last Crusade with my mom and dad. My brother was home for some sporting event, and I don't know why he was just home, because he's younger than I am, and my parents were. But I remember he was pissed off because we saw it without him.
Right.
But yeah, that summer, and Lethal Weapon 2. I don't know if I saw that in the theaters, but Lethal Weapon 1. My parent and you brought up how your parents were very good with introducing stuff. My parents. I was very lucky. My parents never really worried about. I told that story about Eddie Murphy. That was like 3rd grade, and I was watching Eddie Murphy Delirious. I was watching Saturday Night Live when I was in 3rd grade. My parents really didn't ever worry about me not being mature enough to watch these things and take them in and not be able to deal with them. I tell a story to my friends that my dad, my aunt and uncle had. They didn't have HBO, but they had, I bring this up every episode, Prism, which was our local cable station in Philadelphia, because we would watch Flyers and Phillies games on there. And they would show movies. It was the Philadelphia version of HBO. So my dad was watching Blue Thunder with my brother and I. And there's the part in Blue Thunder where he takes the helicopter up to the apartment window, and there's a young lady getting undressed.
Yes.
And I can remember watching it, and my dad just turning around to my brother and I and saying, "Don't tell your mom." And I know my mom would not care, because my mom, anybody who knows my mom and who is listening to this and knows my mom swore like a sailor. So my mom was not a wilting flower. But I think with Lethal Weapon, we had rented it after it had come out in '87, and we would watch it with my grandmother, who also enjoyed Lethal Weapon. She thought she enjoyed Mel Gibson also.
Yeah,
So
well,
I know that we were very excited for Lethal Weapon. I don't know if I saw Lethal Weapon in the theaters. It might have been something that I rented or my family rented after, because as much as movies were such a big part of my life, going to the movies was still an event back then. But it
right.
wasn't something that my family did every week. We were very much a VCR culture where, okay, the big movies like Batman, like Indiana Jones, like Ghostbusters, we would see. Lethal Weapon 2, again, I think Lethal Weapon 2 is still rated R. It's got to be, I would think, for the
Yeah, it
language.
was
So
still rated R.
maybe we didn't go see it, but it was something that you knew in 8 months would be coming out on VHS, so you could rent it.
Right,
And that was even before Blockbuster. We were still in the family owned video store phase, so we would go
right.
to like our local just corner video store and rent it. That was also it wasn't 1989, but Blockbuster opening in our neighborhood was also an event that I don't think kids today could fully understand now, going there and
Oh
seeing
no.
the line out the door, just waiting to be one of the first people to get into the local Blockbuster because, oh my goodness, there's finally a Blockbuster in our neighborhood.
Imagine telling your kids that one of the top places to rent from was Kroger. You know, you had produce at one far end, and then they had a line of videos, mostly horror because they weren't going to pay that much to buy the videos. And this is, a VHS tape was 30 to $60 at the time for one that was a theatrical and not, I ripped it from HBO. Then you had Nintendo games,
Mm.
and you would go grocery shopping. Mom, can I rent this? No, you can't watch popcorn.
Well, that was also something. That was also a big cultural leaping off point for me in 1989. It was the first time I actually did buy a VHS tape on my own, and I got money from my grandmother, from my nana, who went down the shore with us. There used to be. This wasn't the Shore Mall. There was a mall in Atlantic City that looked like an ocean liner. It wasn't
I,
as big, but it
I
looked
can
like an
believe
ocean
that.
liner. And I can't remember the name of it. It's still kind of there, but it's not a mall anymore. It's fallen into, like much of
Mhm.
Atlantic City, into disrepair, and it's been kind of abandoned. But back when I was a kid, there were stores in there. And I remember I wanted to buy Young Guns on
Oh,
VHS.
yeah.
And it was, to your point, it was such a big deal to just buy a VHS tape. Because why would you buy? You can just rent it. But I wanted to own Young Guns because I love that movie. I still love that movie.
Oh,
And
it's a great film.
that was the first VHS tape I bought, which was that summer. But bringing up sequels, also, I almost forgot. License to Kill came out that
Yeah.
summer, and I
Yeah.
remember reading the novelization of it by John Gardner, who wrote some of the Bond novels. Obviously, after Ian Fleming, he had the license to write, not the license to kill. He had the license to write some of the continuing Bond novels, so he wrote the novelization. But that was the second Timothy Dalton, and
Mhm.
I do remember seeing Living Daylights on VHS. My dad was a big Bond guy, and that
See,
was
and neither of my parents were big on that, and your parents
he
were a
read the
bit
book. My
more.
dad read the books. He had
Uh,
some of the original hardbacks that I probably have somewhere. I think he might have given them to me, but he was always trying to get me to read the books, and that was something as a kid. The ABC Sunday Night Movie. I can remember
yeah,
Superman, and I can remember Bond. And that
always.
was a big thing because if you weren't renting the movies, there was no other way you were seeing these movies because you didn't own them. So
Right.
my dad would sit me down and say, "Okay, we're gonna watch." And he loved Connery, but I can remember a lot of the more ones being on the ABC Sunday Night Movie. But I don't. It was before internet culture, so my dad wasn't a troll. He didn't care. He wasn't getting into arguments with people
Right.
about who was
Or
the
who's
best,
the real Bond?
who was the real Bond. So I was excited for License to Kill too, and I don't know even that I don't know if I saw it in the movies, but I read the novelization, just like I read the Batman novelization. I read the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade novelization.
Yes, I read that one.
I
That
can
one.
remember the cover looked exactly like the movie poster.
See, and the one that I had was, and again, being younger, I got from the Scholastic Book Fair.
Yes. Oh.
Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, which was really like, I'm fairly certain it wasn't Harrison Ford on the cover. I'm fairly certain it was just some guy in a leather
Was it Tom?
jacket and a
Was it Tom
fedora.
Selleck?
I don't think it was Tom Selleck either. It's like, but it was as close to a novelization that a second grader gets. But going back to first VCR tapes, that 89 was the first year that McDonald's that I can remember did the get an extra value meal, and for $5.99 you get a videotape, and you had one of five. The only one I wanted out of that was Last Crusade. So as far as starting my crippling physical media addiction,
I feel
that
you,
was
brother.
it.
I feel you. I feel you. The listeners can't see it, but you can see all the all
Yeah,
the DVDs
all the
behind
books.
me. I'm not gonna pan around to all the other books
Well,
and comic books and graphic novels I have piled up down here that are
and
not
what
organized.
what you don't see back here is behind that right there, which is a gotcha I got from a convention, is the complete box set of the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon.
I have that also somewhere. I have that also. I found a soulmate.
Right?
Well, you know what? It's funny because I do want to bring up some of the other movies that were out in '89, but you're bringing up Dungeons and Dragons. I was still watching, as a 14-year-old, I was still watching cartoons
Exactly.
in 1989, and I don't know if I was waking up as much to specifically watch stuff, but when I would wake up, like my son, who's probably still upstairs sleeping right now, when I would wake up on a Saturday morning, the Real Ghostbusters was still on. I think it was the Slimer and the Real
Slimer and
Ghostbusters
the
now,
Real
because
Ghostbusters at
they
that
had
point.
changed to kind of reflect Ghostbusters 2. I don't know if there was really anything else specifically I was watching. I would still watch afternoon cartoons. We most likely still had Transformers and G.I. Joe playing. They still had the Real Ghostbusters in the afternoon. There had to be some kind of Super Friends reruns going on our local UH. And again, this was before cable, so
Right.
it would be our local UHF. For me, it would most likely be Channel 29 was the channel that would show afternoon cartoons.
Well, and see, in at that point, we were still living in Illinois, so it was like our local is now carried by pretty much every single cable company. It was WGN9.
Okay, I thought you were going to say Is WWOR New York? I forget. Maybe I'm.
WWOR is not Chicago.
Yeah, maybe I was thinking of WGN. I knew there was a Chicago station
Yeah.
that is national also, so
Like
I
this
was
is
probably thinking of that.
like it's the only way I can watch Cubs games now. So,
Okay.
but yeah, so WGN, their afternoon lineup at that point was GI Joe, followed by Mask,
Yes.
then Thundar the Barbarian, and then the Super Friends.
The Super Friends was a staple, and
Yeah.
being the
I
big
mean,
superhero
how
nerd
else
I
do you get
was.
these kids, and again, circling back to Batman, how else do you get a bunch of kids to go see a Batman film? Well, they've been watching them on the Super Friends for 25 years at that point, right?
Yeah.
Or however long it had been. And it like D&D, the D&D cartoon was still on CBS. Like it still got like, it would be after Kids Incorporated, but before Kid Video.
Kid Video.
Yeah. So it was right there in that block, and I'm glad you brought up the Saturday morning lineup, because that 89 was huge for NBC. Like and I had it, I had taped it. They would do this thing going into the fall season where they would do what they called the Saturday morning preview.
Oh, yes.
1989, they were introducing a brand new show, and so to do that, the hosts of the Saturday morning preview.
Wait, can I guess who it was? Can I guess?
Yeah.
Was it the cast of Saved by the Bell?
It absolutely was.
Oh, I
It
knew
was
it.
our
I
it was
knew
our
it.
first introduction to Zach Morris and his fourth wall breaking. Like, hi,
Ah.
I'm Zach Morris. He gets sucked into his computer,
Because
and
computers could do that. Like I
his
said, I
computer could
mean,
do that. And
yes.
then Slater and Jesse came to help him, and they get sucked in, and they have to go through and see in their cartoon forms all of these new shows that were debuting. I mean, like some of them were bombs, right?
Sure.
Some of them were an attempt to harness that spark from earlier. So you had like Alf, and then the Karate Kid,
Yes, yes. Oh, yeah, I
but
remember these. I
but
remember them more probably never having seen an episode, but just seeing you're bringing up the Saturday morning preview. They would always have the splash page in comics as it got closer to
right,
the fall. There would always be that splash page that would have the advertisement for the Saturday morning preview. And I,
exactly.
I'm sure you can look online and they have collections of just these. I think there's a website that I've seen on or a Facebook page that has the collection of the different Saturday morning preview splash pages from comics from the 70s into the 90s when they most likely stopped. But I not that I'd ever seen the Alf cartoon, but I remember it being out there, and it's
Well,
most likely from reading the comics.
and it's interesting that you bring up the comics because like my first introduction to D&D other than the cartoon was every comic book I advertised one of three things on the back cover. It was D&D riffs, which that's what all of this is, and or the latest gotcha video game from Ramo Limited. Always. So, but yeah, like that preview was whether you were 14 or you were 7
Oh,
was
I was still most likely watching it then.
yeah,
It was exciting.
this is how I plan my
My morning.
my Saturday mornings. I
And
did
like
not
you
have,
said, you knew when there was that cutoff point when it was either going to be what was it, CBS Story Time, or it
yep,
was going to be I think American Bandstand was still on at that time. So sometimes the cartoons would go maybe right up into that, and then it was like, okay, it's time to
yeah,
maybe go out and maybe do something or
right. And then
go take a shower.
you would get on your bike, you'd go hang out with your friends, and
Mhm.
you talk about what you just watched. I mean, it's interesting because pop culture today is still in essence part of that, right? Like it's instant. It's not you finish watching it and you have like a 4 hour block where you're camped out with your frosted flakes and your orange juice in the TV room. It's now something comes out, you watch it, and you get online and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, have you seen this? This is great. Or oh, have you seen this? I didn't like it.
And believe me, it's definitely not cartoons, because that's one thing when I had kids, having not thought about it for years and years, and then having kids and with them growing up, and of course you
Mhm.
plop them in front of a TV eventually, and you show them the stuff that you like, but you discover that when you're up early on a Saturday morning, there's no Saturday morning cartoons anymore.
Yeah. Well, in
And that was
89 was really kind of the end of that
sure.
because 89, 90, 91, because that's when it was decided that, maybe we shouldn't be showing kids 4 hours worth of half-hour long commercials.
And you think back now, and we were lucky enough to not only on Saturday mornings, but also in syndication in the afternoons have Looney Tunes, as
Right.
you say, half-hour commercials. And sure, I could be cynical and be honest also, because you're being honest. That's what they are. But they
Yeah.
were fun to watch.
Oh, they were a
But to
blast.
watch that artistry of those early Looney Tunes, and to be lucky enough that we were able to consume. And I haven't watched Looney Tunes in years, and I'll see a snippet of something somewhere, and I'll automatically be brought back and say, "Oh my god, I remember watching this," and still find it hilarious. And not to get into a deeper conversation of them censoring some of those. As I
Yeah.
brought up before, my parents didn't think about it then. I didn't think about it then. I didn't think about it until you read that some of it's getting censored. And I think some of it with cultural depictions, I could say I understand. I think I would understand more if they just put a warning before it, just to say, hey, this is how it was. I think you also need to lean on your audience being a little bit intelligent and understanding that you're going to watch things now that media is out there that were made. You can watch things that were made 100 years ago, and 100 years ago is a lot different than it is
Very,
now. So
very
you're going to
different time.
watch things that were made 70 years ago, and that was a lot different. You're going to watch things that were made in 1989 or read things in 1989, and it's a lot different than it is now. I think you maybe need to lean on the people who are consuming it being intelligent enough, or their parents being intelligent enough to talk to them about it. But I think we were lucky to get something like Looney Tunes, and that went through generations, obviously. My parents sat and watched those Looney Tune cartoons, and they were still being, I'm sure there was a Bugs Bunny Daffy hour or a Bugs Bunny
Right.
Roadrunner hour that was still on one of the channels and was also in afternoon syndication that we got to watch. But my kids today, they know who Bugs Bunny is, but never really watched Looney Tunes at all. And I mean, that depends on the parent also. I didn't have the
Right.
DVD collections where I would sit them down and say, watch this, but my parents never specifically said to me, hey, watch Looney Tunes. I just turned on the cartoons in the morning or the afternoon
And
and
it was
got to
there.
see them, and it was there, and became a fan.
Yeah. So, again, getting into that, cartoons and overall cultural impact. My kids were probably, like my older kids, were probably the last ones to watch those Looney Tunes because they did still have some of them that they were showing on networks like Cartoon Network. And I can remember when the youngest of the older three was first getting into those, they did have a disclaimer. And it did say, these are depictions from a time long before where we are now and far less sensitive than we are now to other people's plights. And we could edit them, but we're not going to because we're not going to change the art, which I thought was cool. But you still had to, as a parent, explain that. And then eventually Cartoon Network moved all of them, like the Tex Avery Hour and the Looney Tunes Hour. They all got moved to late night right before they started doing Adult Swim.
I think you leave it, and it is a good conversation starter because
Agreed.
it just brings, you're going to start talking about that, and it's going to lead to other conversations, and those are just conversations you should have. But it's an easy thing to say that, look at us, we turned out okay, but we kind of did. I don't mean to make it simple, but we understand what we were seeing, and I could still watch it now and laugh at it, but also know that, okay, this is how they were feeling then, and you wouldn't make that today, but they made it then. And I don't
I
know.
mean,
I have no easy answer for it,
I
but
because I think that it's a
it
layer
wasn't
of
made with
complexity.
it wasn't made with malice. Unfortunately, it
No,
might have been made with some of it, and it depends on what we're talking about. Also, it might have been made with ignorance, but that doesn't mean it was made with hatred. And
and yeah, I would agree with that. Um, Ignorance definitely, and again, art, which it's all art. Whether we're talking live action movies, we're talking cartoons, we're talking music, all of it. Art is was it
subjective.
well, not only is it subjective, but I think Aristotle said theater is taking culture and holding a mirror up to it. And I think that
Yes,
that's
very
translated.
true.
I think that's translated throughout all art. All art is a mirror being held up to culture at that time. And again, there are things that from 1989 that still exist within the cultural zeitgeist. again, the influence of Batman, Don Bluth, for crying out loud. All Dogs Go to Heaven.
Yeah.
One of the best animated movies, but there's still depictions in that film that can have culturally insensitive representations. I mean, and that's, again, that's only, oh crap, now you're gonna make me do math.
36.
36 years ago, 36 years ago.
Luckily, I had my shoes off, so I was counting on my toes.
Well, I'm like the only guy in IT that can't do basic math. So, but at the same time, we had very positive cultural representations that maybe I wasn't aware of at the time, like Harlem Nights.
Mm-hmm.
Harlem Nights is a great time capsule of that time period for a culture that I'm clearly not a part of.
Sure.
So,
and I can remember it being, there was an excitement to Harlem Nights because you were getting, we brought up Eddie Murphy earlier, you were getting
mm-hmm.
Eddie Murphy, who was the biggest comedy star in the planet, with Richard Pryor, who was he was the successor to Richard Pryor. Basically.
Oh, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
He thought of Richard Pryor as a hero. So he was the driving force behind the movie, Eddie Murphy, and he wanted to work with Richard Pryor. But you were getting also Red Fox, who was the generation before. Yeah, he was most likely one of Richard Pryor's heroes. He was the generation before Richard Pryor. And you were getting Della Reese, who was she was a big actress, but she was a big actress in, and I would say it's very different now because it was still not that it was segregated then, but I think Della Reese was very much more known to the African-American audience than
mm-hmm.
she was to a white audience.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
You saw that Eddie Murphy wanted to bring these African-American voices into a mainstream movie. And it wasn't not that I'm saying, I almost said it wasn't a stupid comedy, and I don't mean that, because Beverly Hills Cop is not a stupid comedy. Beverly Hills Cop is a very good comedy. Coming to America is a very good comedy. But it wasn't a throw-off, something like The Golden Child that he's making, where it's an Eddie Murphy high-concept vehicle. He wanted to make a movie with a certain voice and a certain look, and I think he wanted to celebrate that African-American culture that had come before him and that had inspired him. And I think it was a passion project for him. I don't think it was a huge hit, Harlem Nights, but it's something that you remember. Yeah, it's something you remember from that year, because it was also Eddie Murphy, I think, wanting to show a more serious, he was hitting that part of his career where he wanted to show a more serious side, that he could branch out into different type of roles,
right,
and not just play a different version of himself, basically, in movies.
Right. And I don't want to, like, I want this to sound correct. Where he was able to succeed with Harlem Nights was the fact that, to the John Hughes, Don Bluth, Steven Spielberg moviegoer, Eddie Murphy was palatable.
Yes.
Yep. I'm not going to say that he wasn't threatening, because I love my parents to death, but like I said, your parents were a bit more liberal and, I guess, engaging. I was the oldest kid. They didn't want to corrupt me. So, my parents were very conservative. And it was, well, no, you can't watch this.
Sure.
You shouldn't watch this.
And that, I know what you exactly mean. He was trying to basically, and I'm a coastal elite, I'm a coastal liberal. He was trying to reach middle America.
Which is entirely the target that we were.
Sure, exactly.
Illinois, Indiana. My parents, my dad is from a small town in Indiana, and my mom is from a suburb of Louisville. Yeah. So, wanting to reach and show what that time period was like and what success looked like I think without Harlem Nights, you don't have Malcolm X.
Yeah.
I don't think that you can have
And you're bringing up Malcolm X. I mean, Do the Right Thing came out in
Do the Right
'89.
Thing.
And that was a movie that, even though I didn't see it, I knew about it. It was something
Mm,
that, without having the internet like we have now, I still knew about it somehow because it had seeped itself into popular culture, and it had made such a mark that I still knew the images of it, and I was still hearing about it, even though I hadn't seen the movie. And that was Spike Lee breaking out into the mainstream
right.
also.
Well,
And I mean, that's why I think '89 is such an important year, is that it's setting up the table for what I mean, obviously, because it's the last year of the '80s, but it's setting up what the '90s is going to become. They always say that, you say, oh, the '80s, but the '80s didn't really become the '80s until like '84, '83 or
right,
'84 is the '80s. And the '90s really didn't become the '90s until '93, '94. I
right,
mean,
and like that.
1991 is still the '80s. It's still that
Yeah,
after effect of the '80s is still there, and you're kind of stumbling your way into the next decade. So it's those decades always. It takes a few years for
yeah,
the what you
exactly.
know as that decade to become what it is.
Well, and like you'll see me glancing over here. Um, I have a very good friend of mine who is there. I think about 10 years younger than me, maybe 13. But um, they grew up in a very restrictive household, and I would bring up movies and they would be like, I don't know that reference. So I created a spreadsheet of what I think are the best movies year by year for the 80s. I did the
Does
same
he?
thing for the 90s. The
Do you
problem
say?
is,
Do you say stuff to him now, and he'll be like Captain America and say, "I got that reference."
yes, 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 that happens actually a lot. But I tried doing the same thing for the 90s, and I have got to parse that down.
Well, you brought up Dungeons and Dragons. Were you a comic book reader
Oh,
as a kid?
absolutely. Absolutely. Like
Because I mean, '89 for me with Batman,
mhm,
kind of, it was probably my peak time of reading comics, and there was so much amazing stuff. I mean, I was subscribed to the Amazing Spider-Man, so I was right in the thick of Todd McFarlane.
right.
And it was Spider-Man and Batman for me at that point. Batman, there was a lot. I mean, there was Gotham by Gaslight came out that year.
Hmm.
Arkham Asylum by Grant Morrison came out that year. Batman Year 3, so it was the beginning of
Yep.
Tim Drake, who is my favorite. My favorite Robin. I love Dick Grayson. I like him more as Nightwing. Tim
Yeah,
Drake is my favorite
way
Robin.
better as Nightwing. Even Dick Grayson as Batman when Bruce came back was like, no, I'm done.
Loves the new Superman movie. I hope if the James Gunn DCU gets to spread its wings, I hope we do get to finally see Nightwing in a
Yes.
movie, and a Bat Family. I do hope we get to see a Bat Family. But I mean, there was also, I was reading stuff that had come out. It didn't specifically come out in '89, but I feel like in '89 was when I started, and I'm saying this in a not in a totally serious way, but it's when I became a serious comic book reader, in that I sought out The Killing Joke and read The Killing Joke. I sought out, I think I most likely read Year One and The Dark Knight Returns for the first time in '89, and probably Watchmen, because it was at 14, at 15, I was just starting to move on from like buying comics at the local 7-Eleven and just
Right.
buying whatever I liked. And now I was starting to hear about these other comics and say, okay, I want to see, what are they talking about with Batman Year One? What are they talking about with The Killing Joke? What are they talking about with Watchmen? It was my first time being introduced to Alan Moore, and figuring out who Alan Moore was, to being introduced to Grant Morrison, to figuring out who Neil Gaiman was, most likely
Hmm.
in '89. So it was really, I'm saying it's my peak time just because I was going and seeking out all these comics, but it also shaped what I was going to be into for the next 4 or 5 years of comic reading. And it led me into Vertigo. It led me into, uh, it. It led me into more adult comics, I guess I would say. I mean, I was still reading. It doesn't mean I became some kind of comic snob, but I would seek out Swamp Thing. Became one of
Right.
my
The
more
things
and
that were a bit on the darker side.
Hellblazer and Sandman, yes.
Well,
And I
you
was
know,
more of a
and
big DC guy than Marvel guy
well,
back then.
it's
So
funny you bring up comics because you know, we talk about crippling physical media addictions. I think everyone that's within our generation with comic books had the stair steps of their comic book addiction. You know, it starts at the 7-Eleven for you. For me, it was Hess's Hess's drugstore. You know, where you had the turning reel and you would buy a comic there.
yeah, the spinner rack. Yep.
Yeah, the spinner rack. You know, you would have the spinner rack, and you would go, "Oh, look, it's Spider Man. I want Spider Man." And then you know, by this point, I'm reading proficiency and not just looking at the pictures, and I'm getting that there's an overarching, you know, story that's continuing here. Okay, well, I need the next issue. I need the next issue. Okay, so now I can't get those. Where do I get those from? Oh, two doors down because there's Hess's, then there's the art supply store, then there's the comic book store. So then you get into the comic book store, and then you're like, what is all of this? And there's a running gag that I have with some of my coworkers. Like, you know, you hit a certain age and you have to decide what team you're on, whether it's Team DeWalt, Team Cobalt, or Team Milwaukee, when it comes down to tools. But we've been doing that our entire lives. Eventually, you're either a DC or a Marvel guy, and I was always a Marvel guy. I mean, I liked Batman, obviously. You know, I don't think I really appreciated DC comics until later. Like Batman, Superman, like I I had Superman PJs because I had seen all four of the Christopher Reeve films
Sure.
at that point, right from your local library, kids. But you know, it
We're
was
going to be doing a show on the original four Christopher Reeve
oh man,
Superman movies eventually.
it was and it was such a thing. But you know, there were there were points where like there was the 1981, maybe 1980 Spider-Man movie where his web flinger was basically just a rope that would suddenly
Oh,
appear.
it's the TV show that then they eventually
Yeah,
collected into, and they would put them out sometimes on TBS, or they put them out as a movie. But it was the
right. It
Douglas
was a
Hammond
TV
TV
show.
show. Yes.
You know, you had
Oh, that was big time for me in the early '80s as a kid. I mean, it came out in the late '70s, but watching those in the early '80s, I mean, that was all you got. That and the
right,
Incredible Hulk. But that's how you get the kids, like you're saying. You get them. You grow up with Superman PJs, and you know instinctively as a kid, you know who Superman is or Batman is, or for us basically, because now, and I brought this up in one of my past episodes. Now you walk into Target, and you know that's all it is superhero stuff and Star Wars stuff. And
right.
it's on my first episode of this new season, the Growing Up Geek episode, which I said is that I think in 89, I think it was 89 or 90, but I think it was 89 that I went to my one and only comic convention and bought a Todd McFarlane Spider-Man t-shirt. And I would not wear it outside because I thought that people would make fun of me
Oh
because I
yeah,
was wearing a Spider-Man t-shirt. Now I'm at one of my kids' sporting events or whatever, and that's all the dads are wearing. And mom's also is a Spider-Man t-shirt, a Star Wars t-shirt, a Batman t-shirt. You know, and I could have never in high school, I could have never pulled out a comic book and said, I'm reading Gotham by Gaslight. People would have said, you're a
right.
nerd. What are you doing reading that stuff?
Exactly. But you know,
And I think going back to Batman in 89, I think all roads lead back to Batman in 89.
it really does.
It helped normalize it with, I told my wife last night, when I bring her up on this podcast, I call her a normie, and I'm stealing that from other people. But she's a normie. She's not into comic books. She's not into movies like I am and TV shows. So she's a normie, but it made that 89 movie made it palpable for normies to say, okay, I can say that I enjoyed the Batman movie and I like Batman. But I would have never worn that Todd McFarlane shirt. I could have
Right.
worn it to school because I had to wear a school uniform. I was in Catholic school, but I would have never worn it out in public for fear of being made fun of. And I mean, bringing it back to that year, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the cartoon was huge that year. And I was starting, as I said, I was still watching cartoons, but I was starting to, little by little, I wasn't watching them I wasn't making it a point to sit and watch them. But I would check it out because I had bought some of the collected, it wasn't obviously the original Eastman and Laird stuff from the early 80s, but they had collected them into oversized graphic novels.
Yeah.
And my brother, I think, actually might have bought them. And I think we bought them thinking we didn't realize, Eastman and Laird, they were more serious. It was a parody, but they were grittier than the cartoons were. And just opening up and reading those and just being amazed. And you bringing up going to the comic book store, you were lucky. I would have to go to my 7-Eleven. There were comic book stores, but nothing in our neighborhood, not in 89 yet. So we would have to get my dad to drive us to certain spots to go to the comic book store if we wanted to go. And that was a revelation also, just to be able to see all of those back issues there and say, there's like so much more stuff that I can read.
Right. Like you can go into the boxes and you flip through and you're like, oh, this. But, I mean, and at the same time, again, I being 7 in 89, I think when you're a little kid, you're not as impacted by that. I had this, it was a iron-on transfer my mom put onto a t-shirt that was a bright yellow bat symbol. And I think I wore that shirt until it was, one, not fitting properly, and two, it was a white shirt, and I'm fairly certain that it had more stains on it than a gas station bathroom. But you can get away with doing things like I can remember a few years before that, me and a childhood friend would we were in pre-K and they had like the colored blocks that you would build with. Well, we'd take a green one and a red one and we would be Luke Skywalker and Dark Vader. And again, the eventually you learn proper terminology, and I'm sure there's so many of like Star Wars people who are listening to this like, oh my god, did he say Dark Vader? Yes, that was five.
I almost corrected you.
Yeah, it's believe me, I know where I'm at now with Star Wars, but at the time you don't pick up on the nuance of those things. And it was, you go out to the playground and, well, I get to be Michelangelo, I get to be Leonardo. Those things impacted everything from what we were watching to how we played.
Yep.
And you would, and I saw the same thing with my kids. I get to be the Pink Ranger, I get to be the Green Ranger.
Sure.
Or, well, I get to be Drake. Well, I get to be Josh. All of these things. And, bringing up Drake and Josh, that then gets back into cartoons. In 89, it was the same 7 series on Nickelodeon. It was Pinwheel in the Morning. You can't do that on television. Search for the Lost City of Gold.
Oh, God. You just opened up a memory, yeah.
And Double Dare.
Yeah.
And they would cycle all of those through, and everyone wanted to be on Double Dare.
Yep. And that was filmed close to where I grew up. So I can remember us, even in 88, in 8th grade, talking about it, that it was just kind of breaking then, and people saying, oh, yeah, I know people who were trying to get on the show.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes back to, like you said, and then you bring that stuff. And that's why I think 89 is so important. It's the stuff that you hold on to and then bring to your kids also.
Right.
Because, and unfortunately on this podcast, I always keep bringing it back to the pandemic, man. It's not something you want to remember, but I do remember knowing that, okay, we're stuck inside and going down to my wife's office where I have a lot of my graphic novels and just picking out 5 or 6 of them and going up to my son's room and throwing them on his bed and saying, here, you have time to read? Here you go. These are good. And one of them was The Greatest Batman Stories Ever Told, which I bought that summer because they released it when the movie came out. And it's still the same one. It's dog-eared. It's fallen apart. But for me, because it reprinted stories from the 30s, stories from the 50s, stories from the 70s, like the Laughing Fish, excuse me.
Yeah.
That I had maybe heard whispers of, but had never read. And to finally say, oh my God, I'm getting to read these, and to want to then find out more about them and find more about the creators who made them, and saying, who is Steve Englehart? Who's Marshall Rogers and Terry Austin? Oh, have they done other things? And it was harder for us to do that because I couldn't go online and say, what has John Byrne done? What has Terry Austin done? Then giving it to your kids and saying, here, this is something I liked. Read this because I think you might like it. And there's no greater joy. I mean, sure, graduating college, all that other stuff, having a grandchild, but there's no greater joy than when your child says, oh, I remember reading that in that Batman book you gave me. Oh, I remember reading that in that Spider-Man graphic novel you gave me. And I'm trying now something in 89. My dad used to work part-time for the Philadelphia Inquirer. He would work on the weekends in their distribution. So he would get magazines and newspapers for free, bring them home, which was great because I would read the Sunday comics. And Calvin and Hobbes was the ultimate for me. And now we used to, back then, as I talked about B. Dalton bookstores and Walden Books, you'd go in and they would have the collections, and they would have different. It wasn't the full collect. It was a couple years collections, and they would have different volumes. So I would usually buy one of the volumes, or my brother would, and we would just share it back and forth. And 89 was a big year for the Calvin and Hobbes collections, and also reading them in the newspapers because they were still in the Sunday and the daily newspapers.
Right.
And that's something I do want to eventually get. I've tried to get my son into. I think he might have read the collection because I had the huge. It's hard because I have the huge hardbound collection that they have, but now they're starting to put out smaller, almost digest-sized paperback collections of them in kind of like nice in dust jacket kind of format. So I bought the first one of those, but in 89 I was very big, not only into comic books but also I was still reading. I would make it a point to sit on Sunday and read the Sunday comics, but Calvin and Hobbes is one of the ones I followed and would buy the collections of. Leading on from grade school, I think you brought up Scholastic Book Fair. You would always buy the Garfield collections. Was
Garfield
a big thing.
Or Peanuts.
Peanuts, yes,
was another one. But yeah, like my son has all of my collected the paperback ones. The essential Calvin and Hobbes, and Something Under the Bed is Drooling.
He's drooling, yes.
Yeah. He has all of those, and now he's got a daughter that eventually will hopefully those will be read to her and that sort of thing. So it's full circle, and as I'm looking through this list, I'm going to segue again. We talked about Harlem Nights, and then again without Harlem Nights, you don't have Malcolm X. And another thing that really played into that was his role he played in Glory, which came out in 89. Which is another great film. But right below that on my list is Field of Dreams.
Yes.
Field of Dreams is so much so that for my dad's birthday, now that I'm older, I don't know how much wiser. I'm a big bourbon guy. And we went to a bourbon tasting last January. There's a company called Field of Dreams, free advertisement. They actually make bourbon from the corn in that cornfield.
Oh, that's amazing.
And like their single barrel selection has a number on the back, and you can look it up, and it's like collecting baseball cards, just way more expensive. So,
well, I'm gonna give a free shout out to the podcast. I always give a shout out to the Best Care Anywhere podcast, because I was just on there a couple episodes ago, drinking bourbon which I'm embarrassed to say I did not finish the episode because I had too much bourbon. And I had vowed to myself that I would stay off of bourbon for a while. But now that you're bringing this up, I'm going to have to see if I can seek that out. But Field of Dreams was a big pop culture marker in '89 for me. And I do have a funny story, not about Field of Dreams, but in '88, the year before, we went to the Shore Mall again to go to the movies, and went with me and my mom, my brother, my cousin, my aunt. And we had the choice between Die Hard and Bull Durham.
Yep.
And my brother and my cousin and my aunt went and saw Die Hard. And I said to my mom, I like Kevin Costner. I liked him in The Untouchables. Let's go see Bull Durham.
Yep.
Love Bull Durham. But I remember my mom, who I did bring up earlier and said, she swears like a sailor. She doesn't get embarrassed about any of that stuff. But the scene with Kevin Costner and Susan Sarandon in the bathtub, she leaned over to me and said, I can't believe I'm watching this with my son. But I thought it was a great movie. So Field of Dreams was something that was on my radar for '89.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that it had the effect. I thought it was a good movie, obviously. But now you're talking about being older. When I watch it now, and I was watching it, it was on basic cable. I was flicking around and it was on. So I said to myself, I haven't seen this in so long. I'm just going to sit here and watch it. And watching it as a father and having a parent who had just recently passed away, it meant I turned to my wife and I said, I'm sitting here and I can tell I'm going to start crying soon as I'm watching this.
It has a completely different impact.
Mm-hmm.
But, and that's, my dad, his thing is baseball. Always has been. His favorite sport is baseball. His favorite sport to play is baseball. When I was a kid, as you get older, you move from baseball to softball. He played softball.
He's a Cubs fan?
Say again?
He's a Cubs fan?
No, I'm a Cubs fan.
Oh, okay.
My dad has been a Braves fan since they were in Milwaukee.
Well, I can laugh about the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, the thing is I every year, especially around baseball season, I tell them, as a reminder, y'all won all those World Series with the Cubs pitching staff.
That's very
But it's like his vacation every year. I mean, he's retired, so he's pretty much always on vacation, but he's not, because my dad can't not do. So, but like his vacation every year is they go down to spring training, and I don't have any other social media, so I don't have Facebook or anything like that.
Smart.
But information security. I'm not actually paranoid. I'm aware of what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I get to see pictures. My girlfriend will bring them up because she's friends with my sister, and you can see my sister and my niece and my mom all smiling for pictures, and there's my dad sitting there like this, watching everything that's going on. Like, oh yeah, he'll be a great shortstop, that sort of thing. So Field of Dreams really, one, it incorporated baseball history. 2, it's a heartfelt story. 3, it's my dad's, core values of family and togetherness and that sort of thing. So, it's one of his favorite films, and to be able to get him something made from that same area that was used in that movie and is, again, now a big part of our cultural zeitgeist. You can drive through Iowa and they have a sign that says, next exit, the Field of Dreams. So, and again, it does have a very, very different impact once you're old enough to have kids and have lost someone, So, yeah, it's still a great film. It hits different.
Well, staying in 1989 and baseball, how does he feel about Major League?
How does he feel, or how does my mom feel? My dad.
Is she a big Tom Berenger fan? Is she?
No. My mom is not a fan of that level of slapstick comedy.
Yes.
And my dad loves it. My dad is great. A Mel Brooks guy through and through. But
Tell them about the podcast I did on Sleazebag Cinema, my other podcast on Blazing Saddles. I need more listeners.
yeah,
We're going
I'll
to be
throw it
doing
on
a
my
Mel
list too.
Brooks. We're going to be doing a Mel Brooks episode on here too. So
The again the things that can be said about Mel Brooks, but no, Major League. I especially like when you live in the center of the Midwest.
mm-hmm.
Bob Uecker is as
he's a god,
synonymous
right?
with baseball as Harry Carey is. So, and then Tom Berenger, Corbin Burnson, Charlie Sheen, again, another ensemble cast that were perfect. So,
Yeah, it was a movie that and I should have called this episode Pop Culture of 1989 that I watched later, because I am sure that I did not see it in the theaters, but it was something that when it came out on video, my family watched together. And I keep bringing up being down the shore, but when we were down the shore that whole summer, and you're a stupid kid, and you're saying, "Oh, I have nothing to do. I wish I was at home with my friends. I wish I could spend the whole summer down the shore and and have nothing to do but watch movies and read." I didn't know how lucky I had it, but this is what we used to do: is we used to watch movies over and over and over again. And Major League was one of the movies that we watched. It was probably the first time I experienced Wesley Snipes. I most likely didn't know who he was before watching Major League. And it had cultural relevance for Philadelphia fans in that Wild Thing, Charlie Sheen, obviously Mitch Williams a couple of years later in '93 was basically the embodiment of Wild Thing. But yeah, Major League, we're going from Field of Dreams, which is this emotional and well-made and prestige type of movie, to Major League, which was obviously made as most likely a throwaway comedy, but it's something that's it had two sequels, maybe one other straight to videos. The second one. I think there was a straight to video sequel after that. But Major League has lived on and it does have a cult following, and it was a big movie for it wasn't it didn't make $1 billion, but it was a big movie for 1989. It's weird to think Charlie Sheen was in all of these prestige films early in his career, like Wall Street and Platoon. He was making all of these prestige movies, and then fell into Major League and Hot Shots. You don't think of Charlie Sheen as that serious type of actor.
Well,
I think of him more for Major League and Hot Shots and stuff like that.
Well, and you can go even earlier than that. His role in The Outsiders.
Mm-hmm.
He was viewed as a very serious actor because his dad is a very serious actor. But you saw sparks of that. Like, you saw sparks of the comedy in him playing the junkie, ironically, in Ferris Bueller.
Yes, I think he did a lot of research for that role.
And mostly through his nose. But don't sue me, Charlie. But Born on the 4th of July, another film that came out in '89.
Another film, '89. I think the '80s. Famously, a lot of movies in different ways and on different levels were not maybe relitigating the Vietnam War, and were also, I think it was America and the culture at large dealing with the Vietnam War and the after effects of the Vietnam War. My dad's a Vietnam veteran, so I got to kind of hear it from him with certain movies and certain things, but yeah, so you had movies like Platoon, you had movies like Full Metal Jacket, like Born on the 4th of July. And Born on the 4th of July, I think I've only seen it once. For me, I remember in '89, it was a big thing because it was Tom Cruise going serious. You knew he was going to be nominated for an Academy Award, and the big thing was that this was Tom Cruise's. He's a serious actor now, and I wish I could say I've seen it recently to say, oh, his performance. I remember people saying he is very, very good in the movie. It's a true story.
It is.
And I remember my dad not specifically talking to me about it, but having opinions on it. My dad always, I was telling this story to my son because we were flying back from our vacation a month ago. And I looked over, I was in the row behind him, and I saw he was watching a movie, and it was Full Metal Jacket.
Mm-hmm.
And I just leaned over to him and I said, okay, and he's 14. I said to him, this is kind of an intense movie. I just want to make sure you're ready for it. I know you're old enough, so I trust that you can watch it. I said, just if you want to let me know about anything, let me know. And he said, no, I'm fine. And I said to him, Pop always says the first part of this, where they're in boot camp, is the most real depiction of what being in boot camp to him was in any of the movies that he's seen. He always said to me that Platoon he didn't like because it was, I don't think he said it was, I'm putting words in his mouth, but he said it was too stylized for him. It didn't come off as real. I think he actually said that, was it Hamburger Hill? I can't remember
Hamburger
if
Hill
that
is a
was,
rough one for a lot of us to watch.
was that a Vietnam or was it Korea?
It
I'm
was Korea.
misremembering. Okay. He might have said that was one of the, and of course Saving Private Ryan later, it's World War II, but
Yeah,
I remember seeing Saving Private Ryan and actually leaving the theater and going home and saying to him, I don't think I ever really realized probably what it was that you went through, even though you've told me some stories, just because I still have to watch Saving Private Ryan with my son.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, my dad, so I think in 89 for that movie and just the 80s in general, it was, and you have movies like Rambo, which is, oh, did we get to win this time? You know what I mean? And Reagan, which I brought up at the very beginning,
Yeah.
America's back. And this is, now we get to go and win the Vietnam War because we have Rambo, who is the epitome of America and American military might. So,
Well,
I mean, that's a whole other conversation now we can get into, where with the military and Vietnam movies that were out in the 80s and in 89 that were still dealing with a war that had almost been over for 20 years, 15, 20 years.
And a lot of it dealt with, and it just, not to get on any sort of soapbox here, it really just kind of shows how little Reagan understood Rambo.
Mm-hmm.
You look at First Blood, and it is literally a vet who is dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder and is switched on and doesn't know how to switch off, and it becomes this machine gun laden splatterfest of machismo. But
have you read the David Morrell novel, the original First Blood?
I have not, and
he dies at the end of the book, and I think he has said that he wrote. I can remember in 5th grade reading the Rambo First Blood Part 2 novelization.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I was in 5th grade. I'm a stupid 5th grader. What do I know? And David Morrell writes the novelization and writes in the foreword that, Rambo lives on, even though in my book he died. But I think after the fact, even he was uncomfortable with what Rambo came to represent in the greater pop culture.
Yeah.
And that, I think 89 was Rambo. No, that was 88.
88 was
Rambo Part 3. I'm sorry.
But I mean, again, all that bleeds over because, like, I assure you, there was no way I was watching Rambo Part 3 at 7 in the theater. No. But, Saturday afternoon, TBS Superstation, like, if it's not baseball season, man, the Braves aren't on. You get the highly edited and stylized version. But I think,
well, you also had the Rambo cartoon that was on in the late 80s.
Rambo cartoon. Rambo, Chuck Norris,
yes,
Karate Kid.
Forgot about the Chuck Norris one.
The Mr. T Super Hour, things like that. But I think, especially considering that in '87 the Vietnam War Memorial was put up. At that point, for a lot of people who weren't involved with it directly or indirectly, that creates a degree of realism. That makes it, that gives it firmament. And I think, Platoon is really Oliver Stone's own memories from his enlistment in the Marine Corps. And again, there are certain films that are required viewing for someone like myself who did 12 years in the Marine Corps. Platoon's one of them. Full Metal Jacket, obviously. And Full Metal Jacket, when I went through boot camp, I'm not going to say that boot camp was exactly the same, but they got it 2006 versus 1971. It was still, Gunny Hartman is still how your drill instructors are talking to you.
Yeah. My dad was a Marine also, and that's what he said.
Yeah, he
also always said to me, to lighten it up a little bit, he also always said to me that he should have played J. Jonah Jameson in a Spider-Man movie.
Well, and it's funny because I can look back at boot camp, and it's a very intense time, and you know why it's an intense time after the fact. But I can look back at boot camp and laugh. Can't say that about my entire military career, but I can at least look back at boot camp and laugh. I think really after '87, Born on the 4th of July is another one of those movies that is required viewing. I think it's really a nation learning how to deal and how to heal. And
sometimes you need pop culture to do that. I'm not saying that is the only way a nation is going to heal from it, and I'm not going to say that's the best way, because we brought up Rambo and it being totally misconstrued by the powers that be because they wanted to fit their narrative. It's the same thing with Born in the USA.
Yeah.
From Bruce Springsteen that is played even now by certain people whose name I won't mention that just don't get what the song is about.
Yeah,
and just want it to be about what they want it to be about.
Exactly, and that I think, again, like I said, art is a mirror being held up to culture, and I think you get a lot of these films and these representations of things, movies that also took a very hard look at not only Vietnam, but also hard look at how life was really not as idyllic as it could have been. Dream a Little Dream. I love Dream a Little Dream. But John Hughes was very good at having that representation of star-crossed people. I'm not even going to say lovers, but star-crossed people. You have the haves and you have the have-nots, and there's not really much of a difference, especially in '89. We're at this point, we're disillusioned with the concept of Reaganomics. At this point, we are.
It's also yuppie, very much yuppie culture still in '89, I would say.
Right.
And you're bringing up Dream a Little Dream. You also have Say Anything in 1989, which
I love
really,
Say Anything.
Yes,
love Say Anything.
It was another one that came out in '89 that I discovered later because as the '90s progressed and I got more into grunge and all that kind of stuff and figuring out who Cameron Crowe was, and then going back into his filmography and saying, "Oh, I remember Say Anything. I didn't realize that was him." And it's weird to see that in his. I mean, it was weird at that time to see that in his filmography because he was kind of in that Fast Times at Ridgemont High that he wrote, and he did singles, and he was very much into that scene. This was before Jerry Maguire.
Yeah,
he's done a lot of stuff based on his experiences as a music writer and in that music scene. So Say Anything was, you could see where he was going to go with Jerry Maguire and that kind of stuff. But you're bringing up the cultural differences. I mean, when you look at that now, it's not just a dumb teenage comedy. It's saying stuff about John Cusack's character and how he's growing up and where he's growing up. And it's not just the snobs versus the slobs. And I love comedies like that, like Animal House and Meatballs. But that's not what that movie is.
No.
It's saying something about being in love with somebody, but also knowing your place in society, knowing their place in society, and being uncomfortable with where you are, but wanting to still be who you are and not changing yourself just because just because
Exactly.
you need to fit into a certain image that the person you love, either they want you to or their family wants you to.
Right. And it's very much feelings of inadequacy. It's very much, concerns about how is our relationship going to affect our standings.
And the
It
broader, when I say the broader world, I don't mean the world in general, but I mean your world and
yes.
your existence,
Well,
because
and again,
you don't
that
think about that, where that relationship is gonna change your relationship not only with the person you're in love with, but with your family and their family and with your friends and their friends, because
yeah,
when you get into these serious relationships, it affects more than just the two of you. You think
it
it's only going to be the two of you, but it's not.
well, it's very much a study in it's very much a study in the level of mindful maturity. The ability to see beyond yourself, the ability to see beyond your immediate, but being able to see how those impacts can be cascading. So, it's, again, looking through this list that I have here.
Well, I think it's a testament to, and I joked about it saying, okay, these are things that came out in '89, but you discover them later. Like you said, you're 7, so you're not watching Say Anything and getting this, but it's made in that year, and you're still seeing it because it lives on
Right.
and still has an impact for you a couple of years later. I mean, one of the biggest things, and I'm not gonna lie, I said earlier, like, Batman could be a touchstone for '89, obviously, but for me, a touchstone for 1989, and one of the main things that made me start to realize that, okay, I like things and I'm into things and I want to seek out things that my parents don't, is the album. And I'm laughing because you want it to be this big thing, but the album Pump by Aerosmith came out in
Oh, yeah.
1989. It was the first time in the 80s I liked Phil Collins, I liked Dire Straits, I liked Bruce Springsteen because my dad liked Bruce Springsteen. These were things I listened to, and I would join Columbia House and I would get tapes. I would get a Genesis tape because I liked Phil Collins, and
Right.
and I still like Phil Collins.
I love
And you would
Bill
get the stuff that your parents liked, that they listened to, that then I listened to, and say, okay, I'm going to get this Boston tape from 1977 because I always hear Boston on the classic rock station. And yes, Aerosmith in 1989, they were a classic rock band, but they had come out in '87 with Permanent Vacation, and
Mhm.
I didn't realize who it was. I knew Dude Looks Like a Lady, I knew Ragdoll, I'd heard it on the radio, but I didn't know who it was because I just wasn't attuned to really seeking out bands. But for some reason in 1989, Pump hit me, and Aerosmith was the first band that I became obsessed with, in that I realized, oh, they have albums that came out. And it's funny to think now, in as old as I am and what year it is, but in 1989, oh, they have albums that came out in 1973. That was so long ago. I want to go and find their first album and their second album and their third album. And then finding out, oh, they did Walk This Way. I know that song. Oh, they did Sweet Emotion. I know that
Yeah.
song. I can remember on Friday Night Videos seeing the video for Walk This Way with Run DMC. I thought that it was somebody parodying Mick Jagger. I didn't know who Steven Tyler
It was
was.
actually Steven Tyler and
I
Bill
thought it
Murray.
was somebody who was making fun of the Rolling Stones, who was parodying Mick Jagger, and then seeing that and saying, "Oh, that's who that is." They were the first band I became totally obsessed with them. I
See,
bought their
and
T-shirts, bought the album, videotaped all their videos when we finally got MTV, and would watch all the videos, and it brought me into, but it also made me discover I'd watch them on interviews and they'd talk about the Beatles. They would talk about, oh, I like the Rolling Stones. I mean, I knew who the Rolling Stones were, but I knew who the Beatles were, but I didn't really know them. I just knew they sing,
Right.
Can't Get No Satisfaction. Then wanting to say, okay, I want to find out about these bands. And it just opened up the whole world of rock music to me at that time.
And what's interesting is that for you, that was Aerosmith's Pump. At 7, I'm not really absorbing anything music wise that wasn't my parents, right? And my parents, God love them. My mom's favorite artist of all time is Captain and Tennille. My mom is the sweetest woman on earth, and she loves her some AM yacht rock.
You know what though? I laugh, but now at 50, I like it all. I don't care anymore.
Exactly.
I can listen to Captain and Tennille and I can enjoy it because I know I am not cool.
Exactly.
And what is cool, in all honesty? There was in '89, I liked Aerosmith, which led me into liking grunge. And yeah, I was like, this is the real music, man. And it's not that corporate stuff. I don't like hair metal anymore.
Stuff.
Exactly. You know what I listen to now when I go outside on barbecue? I'll listen to Aerosmith. I'll listen to the Stones. I'll listen to the Yacht Rock station on XM. I'll listen to Phil Collins. I'll listen to Motown because my mom was a big Motown person. I'll listen to it all because what does it matter?
Well, and right around this time, it was when, like I said, my dad was leaving a job in Illinois and we moved to Kentucky. And the local pizza parlor was a place called American Pie. Completely set up like a 50s pizza joint, had maintained through the pizza. Looking back on it now, really wasn't great, but that was, if we were going to go out to eat, that was someplace we went because it was where my parents were comfortable, and they had a jukebox. And a jukebox, kids, was actually a box full of records that you put some change into, hit a couple of things.
It was a bigger version of a iPhone with iTunes.
Yes, exactly. But 89. Sort of circling back to this whole weird stream of consciousness here. 89 was when it was like the start of TGIF, and their anchor show was Full House. Yep. And because John Stamos was friends with them, they got the Beach Boys.
Mm-hmm.
Beach Boys was like my intro to that whole surf rock, harmonizing, things like that. And again, that's kind of like a jumping off point. So then we go to American Pie, and they have all of these old records in there that are Beach Boys. Okay, well, who's this Don McLean guy? Who's this Linda Ronstadt woman? And that's it, and eventually.
And it's fun. That initial discovery it's so much. I can remember we had a store, we had a chain store that's not around anymore called Clover. Mm-hmm. Which it's basically a department store.
Right.
But going there, and this was the time of CDs were just starting to become the dominant force. I don't think I know I didn't have a CD player yet because I had Pump on cassette. Mm-hmm. But you would go in the Clover and they would have the music section, and they would have all the tapes right there in alphabetical order. So the artists in alphabetical order. And I can remember being there and just looking at, okay, Aerosmith, let me see here. And looking at the tapes and looking at the copyrights in the back saying, oh my God, this is from 1975. Right. Do I want to listen to something from 1975? But that discovery of saying, I have all this music that I can listen to that I haven't heard yet. There's a friend of mine, Rob Kelly. He did a Bob Dylan podcast called Pod Dylan. Mm-hmm. And he brought this up, that when you become a fan of Bob Dylan, which I am a fan of, there's so much that he's done over 60 years that you have so much stuff
right
to discover if you're just getting into it. But that was, to your point, you start with one band and they bring you into something else, and then there's so much to discover there. And it's one thing that I kind of lament now is I know I've hit that point where there's not a lot. And I acknowledge it. There's not a lot of new stuff that I'm getting into. I've hit that point where I like what I like.
Right.
So I'm listening to a lot of the same stuff over and over and over again. So there's not a lot of new discovery. Maybe, especially in music. I admit, I've just hit that point where I sit and I drive and I put my kid station on and let them listen to what they listen to. And I can listen to Taylor Swift and say, I enjoy this. Like, I don't mind it, but I'm not that big of a fan where I'm going to go onto iTunes and listen to a whole album. Not because, I don't like Taylor Swift. She's not real music. I enjoy her stuff. I just don't feel like it's not something that I really moves me in that way.
Right.
And I do miss discovering something and liking it so much that it moves me in that way that I want to consume more and I want to get more and I want to see them live. Aerosmith, I would love to say it's my first concert. It was my first real concert. My first concert I went to was the Monkees at halftime of a Temple University football game. Because if you bought tickets for the game, and it was around 86 or 87 when the show came back. So we went and saw the Monkees with like Gary Puckett and the Union Gap and other 60s. So that was my first concert, but Aerosmith was the first real. My parents took me. It was Aerosmith. The Black Crowes opened for them, and I love the Black Crowes. They kind of got me into the Black Crowes. They opened for them in 1990. And I remember sitting down and the guy next to my dad offering him a joint, and he was like, "No, it's okay, man. I don't do that kind of stuff anymore." But my mom, and it's funny because my mom, my dad was very much, he was like a Doors guy who he got me into the Doors because I have his albums sitting behind me now, his actual albums that he gave to me. He was into the Doors, the Stones. My mom and dad were not into Aerosmith, and she even said, she's like, I never liked them in the 70s, but she loved Pump. It's one of her favorite. She would always say to me, like, can you put that on? I love that album. She loved going to see them. So it kind of but I also was influenced by her. Like I said, she was big into Motown. So I would listen to the stuff that she liked and just liked all of the Motown stuff. My dad obviously was a big influence on my musical taste because he would always listen to the classic rock station driving around in our car. I didn't have AirPods like now where my son is in the back with his AirPods on and I just listen to whatever I want to because he's listening to something on there.
Like what you got to listen to in the car was whatever got punched on that that dial.
And I remember getting an FM radio in our car, having an FM. My uncle worked for Pep Boys, so he was able to get my dad a discount and was able to install an FM radio in the car.
Well, like my dad liked AM talk radio. That's what my dad would listen to. My mom at home, it was like the local oldies station was an AM station. So like and it was a lot of oldies, but then like you would get things that were mixed in that like as a kid you would recognize. Like, I may not have at that point known Love Will Keep Us Together, but I did know the Growing Pains theme song, which would come on. Like, oh, it's not even on the TV; it's on the radio. So it's. And again, my musical taste greatly diverged from my parents. Like I'm very, the guitars. I'm very much into. Like I think the Beach Boys led me to finding other classic artists, and then I found out that there was this band from Birmingham that made a song about a comic book character that I liked. So I discovered Black Sabbath, and let me tell you, that was a dark day in the house.
I can imagine, yeah.
So but I discovered Black Sabbath, and then like my taste went towards things like I can remember being at the skating rink and hearing Head Like a Hole by Nine Inch Nails for the first time.
And that stuff was bubbling under in 89. I mean, Nirvana released Bleach in 89, which I had no idea. Obviously, I would love to say I was cool enough to know that Nirvana existed in 1989, that Soundgarden was out there in 1989. I didn't. But this stuff was just starting to bubble under. And that's why I mean, like 89 was when I first started to feel like pop culture was mine, that I was starting to... that it was the stuff that I liked and that my identity now was being associated with this kind of stuff.
With these things that I like. Yeah. And like like I said, my parents were very conservative. We were not allowed to watch MTV when we had it.
Hmm.
Not allowed. Didn't say we didn't.
Didn't say you didn't, of
You
course.
know, but I don't know that I would have necessarily had exposure to things like you bring up Do the Right Thing. I
Public
don't know that I
Enemy in
would have had
89.
exposure
And
to
Public Enemy was in '89 too. So I mean, just
exactly,
associated with that, yeah, Public Enemy was
exactly.
starting.
Fight the powers that be.
Yep.
And then because I knew who
And
Public
believe me,
Enemy
for
was.
as liberal as my parents were, that I'm sure scared the living shit out of them seeing Public Enemy.
But without Public Enemy, then you don't. I don't think that without Public Enemy and Ice-T, I don't know that you have that progression to NWA and what became gangster rap, which is really it.
Yeah, that was you're very right. I think that was bubbling under too. I mean,
Yeah,
again, 89 is you're getting the ingredients for what the 90s are going to be. They're not all there yet, but it's starting to coalesce
yeah,
together.
they're
Even
they're
even
they're
the Beastie
making their
Boys,
appearances here and there.
yeah, even the Beastie Boys, which Licensed to Ill in '86 was one of the first cassettes I ever bought on my own. And then in '89, Paul's
Old
Boutique, which
Boutique.
at the time was not well received, but is now seen as a classic and is seen as groundbreaking in the genre.
Yeah, and we
And it
had
showed what they were going to become in a couple of years. Also, that they were just not going to be that stupid party band that everybody
right
one hit wonder
exactly.
that everybody thought they were going to be.
Well, and I got to see the Beastie Boys
Oh, very
many
jealous.
many years ago at Bonnaroo, and then shortly thereafter, Adam Yauch died.
Okay, yeah.
Last year, Mixmaster Mike opened for Godsmack. Oh man, like you want to talk about just a straight up DJ set that was phenomenal right there. And now I'm going back and seeing some of these bands later in life
Yep.
that we've seen the Beach Boys. I've come full circle from.
Yeah, it's funny that you're bringing up the Beach Boys because with Brian Wilson dying, I mean,
Mhm,
I'm always the person I know of his legacy,
mhm.
and I know the greatest hits. I've never been the biggest. I own Pet Sounds, and I respect what Pet Sounds is, especially as a Beatles fan, because their Revolver and Sergeant Pepper and
Right,
Pet Sounds are so intertwined and they feed into each other. But I have friends of mine who are Beach Boys fans who say you should listen to some of the early '70s Beach Boys stuff because it's after their first initial wave,
right.
of fame, but they kind of got a little weird and they got a little experimental and they changed from what you would expect. So in the back of my head, I keep saying to myself, I need to get into a little bit of more Beach Boys, and that brings back again that feeling of there's probably stuff there, a whole area that I haven't discovered yet that maybe I'll like. I don't know
But
yet, so
that same impact is felt in 89, 90, 91 because without like the Mamas and the Papas and without the Beach Boys, you don't have Wilson Phillips, which
yeah.
I don't care who you are. I don't care
literally, you
how
don't
much.
have literally you don't have Wilson
Exactly.
Phillips.
I don't care who you are. I don't care how masculine you are, or how much machismo you have. If if you don't know the words to hold on,
Hold on.
yeah,
I don't have much machismo, so I'm going to admit that I know the words to Hold On, and I can remember watching that video. One, because who was the blonde with the short
China
hair?
Phillips.
China Phillips. I was very enamored with China Phillips. I didn't know who she was then. I didn't know that her bloodline that she had, but I look back now, and you know what? When those songs come on, it brings me back to 1989. But I also sit there and say these are good songs. Roxette
Roxette.
was
Roxette's another
because
great one.
I had just gotten, as we brought up, I had just gotten cable, so I was just really MTV
Mhm.
was on most of the time. Roxette, like I said, Aerosmith, Samantha Fox.
Yeah,
That was big time in 1989.
and
But you also had, I brought up Columbia House. So I most likely started buying tapes again in '89 and was buying stuff that Yeah, I thought I liked. So you had Young MC
Right?
with Bust a Move.
Bust a
But I
Move.
have that cassette somewhere because I said, oh, this is great. This guy's going to be around forever.
Yeah,
Little
but
did we
again,
know.
it's those shifts in perspective where,
But you had Milli Vanilli. I was also big into, I was still very much into, and I'm doing air quotes as I usually do, heavy metal, which was
yeah.
basically hair metal. Very much Skid Row,
But
Poison,
see,
Warrant.
and even then, when you're looking at bands like Skid Row and Guns N' Roses, you're
Yes,
seeing that
yes.
shift away
Yes, you are.
from
Yep.
you're moving further away from, oh yeah, check him out, and you're moving away from up all night, sleep all day,
Ah, yes, Slaughter.
into things like 18 in Life, which is really a
Yes. Skid
dark,
Row, I think Skid Row is a very underrated. They were
incredibly
very
underrated.
overshadowed by Guns N' Roses. They never, they were big for a while, but they never reached that superstardom type of status that other bands did.
I
Like a
think
Motley Crue, who I actually think they're better than Motley Crue, and I'm not cutting up Motley Crue because, as we said again, I went through that grunge phase where
mhm,
I said, okay, I hate all of these. Poison, I don't like
yeah,
them anymore. Motley Crue, don't like them anymore. And then 10 years later, I said, you know what? Why did I stop listening to Poison?
yeah.
Poison's got some good songs. They don't have to. They're not my favorite band of all time. Now I can listen to Warrant. I'll listen to Cherry Pie. Yeah, why not?
It's and again, all of these things that I wasn't supposed to be taking in.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, those are
sorry,
the
mom,
best.
when you
Those are the
hear
best.
this.
Those are the best things, though.
Well, yeah, and again, 89. You bring up, you know, hair metal and things along those lines, and you have Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure,
Yep.
which is schoolhouse rock disguised as two idiots.
Yeah, and I think that was my first exposure to George Carlin.
Yeah.
And my
Yeah.
dad loved George Carlin, but I wasn't. He has George Carlin albums on album, but he wasn't listening to them in front of me. He
Well, yeah,
wasn't
because it's
watching.
George Carlin.
Yeah, exactly. Again, my parents were liberal, but they weren't that liberal. But that was my first exposure to George Carlin. And then years later, watching HBO specials and
Oh
that
yeah,
little light going off in my head saying, oh, that's George
that's
Carlin. He was
Rufus.
in, it's Rufus.
And
And then watching Doctor Who and saying, wait a minute, why is he traveling around in
a phone
in a
box.
phone box? Time traveling.
Well, and what's awesome is that, like, again, it goes full circle because my oldest daughter, we tend to hang out with her a lot because she's 33. We it's a different dynamic when you can where you no longer have to be the parent. You now can be
Yes.
the
Well,
friend.
I'm saying yes, like I know, but I
Yeah,
understand what you're talking
yeah,
about.
you'll get there. Trust me.
Yeah.
But not that long ago, she's like, "Hey, I just watched Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. He didn't tell me Mr. Conductor was in it."
Yeah. There you go.
So
I'm
it's
sure there's people who think they see Ringo Starr and then say, I didn't realize that Mr. Conductor was in it because he was one of the conductors
yeah.
on
I didn't know he played the drums.
Alec Baldwin, for
Right.
God's sakes, was Mr. Conductor. Yeah.
So, but and then
And I
you
think
have
we lose that. I think we've lost that now, our generation too, that kids entertainment, you could have George Carlin be this groundbreaking comedian, but he could also go and do something like Shining Time Station and
right.
Sesame Street. I brought this up on other podcasts where you could watch Sesame Street and be exposed to Stevie Wonder. You could be exposed to Jesse Jackson was guesting on Sesame Street.
Yeah.
I don't think you see that. And maybe you do. Maybe I just don't see it. But this is how I was exposed to a lot of these people. Was seeing them on the Muppets, was seeing them on Sesame Street, was seeing them on kids shows. Richard Pryor had his own Saturday morning cartoon show, Pryor's Place.
Pryor's Place.
This is after he set himself on fire while he was freebasing heroin.
Which I love his description of that. And what's funny is that he actually lists the street names.
Yeah.
And when he's describing it, the thing is, in '89, I was living in Peoria, Illinois.
Ah, okay.
So
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I know where that is.
Yeah.
You
Yes.
know, obviously not at 7. I wasn't listening to Richard Pryor,
Sure.
but
Sure.
you know, uh, again, one of my favorite. I will still crack that joke, and it's sad that people don't get it. Like I can buy the match, and I can go, look, it's Richard Pryor running down the street.
Running down the street.
You know,
And people did used to say that then
yeah, yeah.
after
Well,
he did it,
he
I can
even said
remember.
it in his special. He's like, don't
Yep.
think I ain't heard y'all.
Yep. Made some
You and
nasty
Kurt
ass
actually.
jokes on my ass. But you know what? That's why he was brilliant, because he knew if I don't address it, other people are going to address it. So why not get ahead of it and just make fun? And that's what was great about Richard Pryor. He could make fun of anybody, but he
including
could make
himself.
fun of himself even more, and that's what made him. That's why you don't think of it now, because as much as we haven't changed, as much as the world sucks, the world has changed in a little bit, and the way that's how he broke through as a black comedian who was so big at that time. I mean, you had, and we're gonna, you don't want to bring it up now, Bill Cosby, who was, and that's again, you bring that up with Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor, that whole bit with Eddie Murphy talking
Yeah.
about Bill Cosby calling him up and complaining to him about using different language, and Richard Pryor said, tell him next time I'll come and kick his ass or something.
Yeah,
like
something like that. But again, it's you bring up Bill Cosby, and in 1989, Bill Cosby
he
did
was
no wrong. He
was
wrote,
America's dad. He was America's dad.
Yeah, he wrote an entire book on being a parent.
Yeah.
He every Thursday night,
Well, that whole
Cosby
NBC lineup on Thursday night, it was the last year of Family Ties in '89, but it was Cosby, Family Ties, Cheers, and Night Court.
And then when Family Ties left, it was a different world.
Was it? I was going to say it was a different world. Yes,
different world.
But that was again before streaming, before DVRs. That was appointment television. I don't do that with as much as I consume pop culture with my kids. We don't sit and watch 2 hours of television together like that. That I can remember sitting with my parents saying, okay, it's time to watch the Thursday night shows. We're going to watch The Cosby Show. We're going to watch Family Ties or A Different World. We're going to watch Cheers, and we're going to watch Night Court. And then a lot of times my dad would watch Hill Street Blues. That was gone by then. I don't think they watched LA Law.
You see,
but even TV, by the time you brought up the Saturday morning preview shows, you would have the TV Guide fall preview. And I can remember by this time, this is when I wanted to discover shows that I wanted to watch. Quantum Leap.
I know the first place I was going to go.
Yes, Quantum Leap in '89. And there was a show, and we'll talk about Quantum Leap. There was a show in the '88-'89 TV season called, when I was talking to you about this episode, and then I started to look, I was looking to see what shows came out in '89. There was a show that is long forgotten, but for some reason I remember it, and I remember watching it, called Tattingers, which was Stephen Collins owned a restaurant, and it was an hour-long drama, and they solved the mysteries. I don't know why I wanted to watch this show, but I did. And it was only on, I think, for 13 episodes. It got canceled.
Well,
but yeah, I remember watching it that year. The famous Teddy Z came on that year with John Cryer.
Yes.
And I can remember sitting there saying, okay, this is going to be a show that I like, that I watch. And I lasted one season and was canceled.
Yeah, well,
because I wanted to expand my, I thought I was moving beyond that Thursday NBC. It wasn't must-see TV then, but that NBC Thursday lineup. I was going to move beyond that now and like my own things. Well, and getting cable in '89, you brought up MTV, the Comedy Channel. It wasn't Comedy Central then. Comedy Channel debuted in late '89, and that was something that I was excited for. And it was basically, then it was MTV for comedians. Like, they would show clips of stand-up comedians. They would have all day. It was like 24-hour. It was like MTV, where it was streaming. It would have different shows. Yeah, they would have different shows like short attention span theater and the Rachel Sweet Show. She was a stand-up comedian. She would introduce clips from old movies or stand-up comedians. They had their own late night talk show called Night After Night with Alan Havey that my brother and I watched from 89 into 90 in the summer. It would be on. It was just a stream. Nick Bakay, who then he did the voice of the cat on Sabrina the Teenage Witch. He
Oh
was
yeah.
he was his sidekick.
Well,
And they would just sit and riff for hours. And my brother and I, we weren't even stoned. We just would sit there and watch this, and we just enjoyed it. There are still times.
what's
They used to do a bit called, they would make fun of how cheap the show was. And they would say that people stay at the Mobley Hotel. And my brother and I, 30 years later now, can see each other sometimes and say, the Mobley. And we're the only two who know what we're talking about.
Well, but I mean, it's that same, again, that same cultural zeitgeist. Like that was not offered on our cable plan that I was aware of. In fact, where we lived in Kentucky, we didn't have cable. Then when we moved to Indiana, um, I don't think Comedy Central showed up until almost 2000. I think it was, and really, it's the power of South Park that did that. But 89 is early episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Yes, and that was on Comedy Channel also.
It was also because WGN carried it.
Okay, yeah, because I mean it was a local show, like cable access show in Minnesota,
and then they ended up shipping it down to Chicago because it's another market that has that.
And this was how, again, I was developing my sense of humor,
right,
and moving beyond. Not really, because 89 Saturday Night Live, that was almost kind of my cast. And everybody has their cast.
Right.
Saturday Night Live, so that was kind of my cast. I was always a big Saturday Night Live guy, so I hadn't moved beyond Saturday Night Live. But watching, like I just said, night after night with Alan Havey, and watching Mystery Science Theater 3000, I was starting to say, okay, this is my type of humor that I like, and this is
it's deadpan, it's straightforward. I to the point where there's still people I can reach out to. Like I can send an email right now to a former coworker of mine and be like, push the button, Frank. and it's, and again, things that transcend, 89 first season. Now we have riff tracks, and there's like you go onto a streaming service like Pluto, there's a whole channel dedicated to nothing but all riffing all the time.
Oh, hell, you have podcasts and you do watch-alongs on podcasts of movies. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking I did it for, again, I'll bring up the Best Get Anywhere podcast. We did the original MASH movie. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, okay, I trained for this by watching Mystery Science Theater 3000. Not that I'm making fun of the movie, but you're talking and you're saying, okay, I have to come up with some funny things to say about this. That's basically what Mystery Science Theater 3000 was. And I joked, I mean, I'm sure that college kids were sitting up stoned in their dorm rooms watching this stuff. My brother and I weren't, but we were still on summer nights at 2 a.m. watching this stuff. And it was just that excitement of discovery, that this is something different. It's something new. And you feel like, okay, I'm in like this exclusive group because not that many people are watching this.
Right.
And this is our thing. This is something for us to share. And you feel like, okay, this is how I'm going to define my personality and define my taste. And I think that's what this episode is about, just developing those types of
like whether they're seeds that are planted or they're saplings at some point in this year, almost whether I watched it later or whether I didn't, or whether I watched it at the time, because I did watch Bill and Ted, not in theaters. I want to say it was that we rented it. But that was my exposure to bands like Slaughter.
Yeah.
That you can get into Bogus Journey. Bogus Journey was my first exposure to the band Primus. And I'm looking at this. The Burbs came out in '89.
Yes.
One that doesn't get enough love, Gleaming the Cube.
Yeah. Yes. That was something I would always see the cover in my local video store. And I think I've seen it once. It was a long time ago. It was probably in the early 90s. But that was one. They also had the the one sheet was in comics also for Gleaming the Cube.
Yeah.
It would be an advertisement in the comics, so you would see it. You would
Yeah.
see it in there all the time.
But, that was my exposure to skateboarding. That was my exposure to the new wave of punk. So, you started getting bands like Bad Religion and Social Distortion and bands like that were on that soundtrack. And like all of these things had this major impact on what the next 10 years would be. So you go from Christian Slater skateboarding with a 17-year-old Tony Hawk and, Social Distortion and Bad Religion and bands like that. Within 5 years, you have the X Games.
Yeah.
Within 6 years, you have, what is it, Warped Tour.
Yeah.
And
that's what I'm saying. I mean, 89, 90, 91, it's the 90s are starting to form right there. You just don't know it because you're living through it. But now we can look back and say, okay, I see where this was coming from. And I see then that how it then took over the culture. And 1989, I really do feel like not only for me, just in my, and there's so much I haven't even brought up yet. Tom Petty with Full Moon Fever was a huge touchstone for me. Again, if Pump was number one, then that Tom Petty album was number two. It was just that I like this, and this is something. And it was an artist where I said, "Oh, I have all this stuff now. I can go look back on and buy."
You can go through and go from all of the Heartbreakers' greatest hits all the way up into.
And Tom Petty helped me introduce me to Bob Dylan because he was so associated with Bob Dylan and with the Byrds and with that, and even George Harrison's solo stuff because the Traveling Wilburys. And then even with movies, as you said, there's a movie that nobody knows about this movie because it was not a big movie. Only my brother probably knows it, called The January Man with Kevin Kline and Alan Rickman. And it's just this little detective movie, but Kevin Kline, the style he had this like black trench coat.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember watching it just saying, that's what I want to be able to wear. I want to look that way.
Right.
Eric Clapton released Journeyman in 1989. My grandmother, we were down the shore, gave me the money to buy it on cassette. It's a great album. It's one of his better albums, especially for the 80s, because he kind of fell into that 80s synthesizer trap that all
I think
classic rock guys. But he was kind of getting back to his blues roots for Journeyman. But I do remember also with cassettes, you would pull out the inside and it would have the lyrics and the pictures and everything. And he's sitting there with the guitar with a long gray trench coat.
Yeah.
And that Eric Clapton always had cool hair, which unfortunately I did not. I do not have. I don't have any hair. But looking at that and saying, one, this album is really cool. Two, I want to look cool like that. Now, I never did because I've never looked cool. But these were the things that were influencing me. It wasn't only just the music. It wasn't only just the movies. It was the way people looked and the way people acted. So it was starting to inform my personality. And, at that age, 14 to 15, you're not totally fully formed yet. So you're taking this all in and you're saying, okay, what are the things I want to take from music, from TV, from movies, and maybe try to incorporate them into myself and see what I'm going to turn out to be. And what lasts and what doesn't last and what's good and what's bad. And hopefully with hindsight and with age, you start to realize, okay, maybe this stuff should fall away and this I'll keep. And
and it's, I think everyone.
And you help to define you just help to define yourself.
Exactly. And
it's from High Fidelity. I do believe. I had a friend of mine once watch that movie, and it was probably 25 years ago. He said to me, "Oh, the John Cusack character reminds me of you." And at first, I was like, "Oh, that's great." And then I was like, "Yeah, but is it?" But I do agree with the statement that he makes in that movies, music, TV shows, these things matter. And
they
stuff from 1989, almost more than any other year, hasn't mattered to me because we're sitting here. How many years did I say? 36? Yeah. 36 years later doing a podcast about the pop culture that we love from 1989 and realizing as we're doing it how much it influenced not only the 90s, but the influences are still felt today.
Absolutely. And you bring up High Fidelity. little bit of trivia. Um, one of my high school classmates is in that movie.
Oh, really? In
Yeah.
what part?
He is the skater kid with the Charlie Brown shirt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the guy's name is Chris Raymond. Super good dude. Always has been a super good dude. And it's funny. He's playing this stoner kid.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Dude's complete straight edge. He's at
He's a good actor.
last time I spoke with him, he was a substance abuse counselor.
Wow.
Yeah,
Hey,
I mean, super good dude. So and at that point, I was living in the Chicago area at that point in my life when all of that was going on. So you can still go to that record store. It is on Belmont Street, but the top five albums, these things all that influenced who I am. I think
I've
it
had lists like that, by the way, and
same.
that's before that book and movie came out. I've had lists like that.
But at the same time, it's a means of tracking who we were, who we are, and who we will be.
Yeah.
And again, 1989 being one of those years where all of that just kind of coalesced and influenced what's now been 43 years of life, 36 since then, but 43 overall.
Yeah. Well, I think we've been talking for over 2 hours, and I have the list just like you. We could probably go for another 2, 3, 4 hours. But
Days,
I do.
probably.
But, well, I'm going to say first of all, for your first podcast, you're a natural because I do like with these podcasts. Like I said, I have the list, but I don't want to go down and just say, okay, this is the movies that came out in 1989. Let's talk about this. I find it more interesting, and I found this conversation more interesting to say, all right, 1989, go. And we're going to go with our personal remembrances because somebody could come and listen to this. And I would hope that somebody listens to this episode and shoots me a line or emails me or messages me, and say, what were your remembrances of 1989? Because it's probably going to be totally different. I mean, I'm sure they'll say Batman.
Oh yeah,
But,
Batman's going to be up there. It's almost guaranteed.
somebody's going to say, I listened to the B-52s. Their album came out that year.
Right.
And believe me, I had it on the list because that was the first time. I'm sure I heard Rock Lobster once in my life. I didn't know who they were, but by the end of 1989, I knew who the B-52s were, and that led me to REM, and REM led me to other things.
Right. It's just
and
the cycle of everything. Again, I didn't even get all the way through the movie list. I haven't even touched the music list. But again, I think.
Well, I might have to come up. You might have to shoot me the music list, and then we're gonna have to come up with. We'll just come up with a whole totally separate episode on just. It doesn't even have to be music of 1989. It could just be. I'm sure that there are conversations to be had about all of the stuff on there. Or we'll just have a sequel. We'll just have sequel episodes to this one, just like 1989 was the summer of sequels. We'll have sequel episodes of this one and do 1989, the music, 1989. It's going to be like the CNN, the 90s, but it'll just be on this podcast. And it'll be us talking about our personal
I feel like we're doing a better job than Blitzer discussing how things were.
But yeah, like I said, we've been talking for over 2 hours, but this has been a fun episode because I wanted to get into, like I said, I sat down and one of the first things was, Aerosmith. And for you, it could be something totally different. And for whoever's listening, it's going to be, I remember this music from 1989. I remember this TV show, and it really affected me. And that's what's just so amazing about pop culture, and it's what's amazing about that year. There was just so many, and I'm sure, and again, I'd love for people to let me know, there are other years in people's lives. They'll say, well, 1991 for me was the year that I really got into pop culture, and I really started to get into the things that I like. And it's always going to be different. My son one day will say, well, this is the year that I started to like this kind of stuff. And it's just so interesting to hear not only your remembrances of this year, but other people remembering what got them into the things that they're into and what year it was and what the things are that they enjoyed and what we hold on to. Because like I said, I'm at that age now. And I'm not saying it in a maybe a little bit curmudgeonly, but not in a curmudgeonly way. There's not many new things. I could say, hey, I should listen to the Beach Boys, but there's not a lot of, I mean, in certain areas, especially in music, there's not a lot of new music that I'm listening to. I wouldn't say in TV and movies, but that's a little bit different because I'm more of a TV and movie guy.
Right.
Music, I think I'm stuck in my ways, and this is what I'm going to listen to. But everybody's going to have those stories, and it's going to influence me, just like you talking about the Beach Boys and me saying, you know what, I do have to listen to the Beach Boys. And now you talking about it
Right.
has gotten me excited to go back and listen to some of this stuff. So I just think it's really interesting to hear people's stories about the things that they like. Like I said with High Fidelity, these things matter.
Right. You know, and I think for all that effort that is being put in, and I'm going to be very vague about this, for all that effort that is being put in to keep us apart, something like this brings us together.
I think that's a good place. One, because it's true, and two, because it sounds a lot better than anything that I just said. But it's a good place to end the episode. I do want to thank you again for coming on your
Absolutely,
first podcast, and I will definitely be having you on again. Is there any? Do you want to get mention anything on social media or anything like that? Do you want anybody bothering you on social media?
No, I guess I don't really have a whole lot of social media. What you see is what it is, and what I want from social media is that last line to be taken seriously. For all that people are trying to keep us apart, we have a global community. There's no need to keep us apart when we've got shit like this that can bring us together.
Yeah, it's definitely true. And, I am as guilty of it as other people too. And I have to catch myself sometimes and think about it and I do think about it with something like this, with this podcast. And I'm being honest when I say, that's why when I put this stuff out there, that when you say, yeah, I want to do it, it's like, great. Because we talk to each other online, but I didn't grow up in the Midwest. I don't know what that's like.
Right.
And you didn't grow up in a row home in Philadelphia. You don't know what that's like. But we could get on here and talk to each other for almost 3 hours and have an awesome time. And like I said, we could go another 2-3 hours. That'd be great. I don't know how many people would listen to a 5-hour podcast.
I don't know that a lot of people would. But this gives us the opportunity for the 89 part 2.
Yeah, but it's amazing that you can do that for people who grow up in different parts of the country and are a little bit different ages, but you can find the common ground and you can have fun talking about it. And that's what I want to do with this podcast. And like you said, hopefully it sounds corny, but if more people remember that, the world could possibly be a better place. It's going to take a while, but we'll get there someday.
We will. I think we have a good groundwork. I have hope.
Sometimes, you know what? You just have to hold on to that hope, right? I mean, if anybody else wants to come on and share, I always say this to people. I hope that the people who are listening, I always ask them to share the episodes with their friends and family. I always ask them to shoot me a review on Apple. And it's just because I want it to get out there, because I do enjoy talking to new people and having people bring subjects to me, because it's fun. What's a better way to spend a early Sunday? I don't want to be out mowing my lawn. I'd rather talk about the music of 1989 than be outside mowing my lawn. I mean, that's not fun.
Keep me going for the next 3 hours because I have to mow my lawn.
But if anybody does want to come on, if anybody does have ideas for episodes, or if anybody just wants to check out past episodes, I am on Twitter and on Bluesky at Pop Culture Basement. You can also find me at Nick Jamison or This Lightsaber Kills Fascists. And Anthony, I want to thank you again. I had a really this was a great time talking to you, and it was a great time listening to your experiences and how 1989 shaped you in your life. And I do look forward to talking to you again because I had a great time.
Absolutely. I'd love to be back at any point, or just shoot the shit on the one app.
We will definitely be shooting the shit. I promise you. I'm a good shit shooter. Don't worry.
Hey man, I appreciate it.
And to everybody else, I wanted to say thank you for listening. Again, if you could share the podcast with your friends and family, shoot me a review. You can even give me a 1-star review and shoot me a comment because it just helps with the algorithm. But you can find the podcast on Apple, Spotify. It's on YouTube also. There's no video. It's just the audio. But if you listen to your podcasts on YouTube, it's out there too. And I wanted to say thank you all for listening, and go out there and talk to people about what you like in pop culture. You might find some commonality out there, and that'll always make the world a better place. But until then, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.